In this video, what we're looking at is storage devices and the media which we play on them. So the first one which we're going to look at is CDs and DVDs, and that means compact disc and digital versatile disc. And we'll look at CDs first of all. So you have a CD drive which takes CD-ROMs, so read-only memories, and it also takes CDRs, which are recordable, and CD-RW, which is recordable and rewritable. And so the CD-ROM, all three of them in fact, have a capacity of about 650 megabytes. You can get slightly different sizes, but they're around 650 megabytes. The speed at which we can read the data off of these media varies depending on how fast it spins the disk. But if we go for a 1x drive, we can get about 150 kilobytes per second. And if we were reading at, say, a 32x drive, which is spinning fairly fast, then we can get about 4.8 megabytes per second off of the drive. In terms of portability, the media itself is fairly portable, so we'll say it's portable, especially when we put it inside a case. In terms of durability, they're fairly durable. They'll last for about 10-20 years. However, you are meant to use a case with them. And of course, if you scratch them, that can degrade the data which is on them. In terms of reliability, they are fairly reliable. Obviously, if you drop them and scratch them, then that's not going to be the case. And obviously, over time, they do naturally just become unreliable. And in terms of what they're used for, obviously we know up until recently they were the major way of the delivery of music, and also for software. So the major uses there. Next we look at DVDs, digital versatile discs. So you have a DVD player, and then the media which you use inside that will be DVD-ROM. And these are really just exactly the same as CDs, except that they store more data, so we don't really need to explain what DVD-R and DVD-RW mean. Exactly the same as a CD, so recordable and rewritable. In terms of the data rate, because they needed to run video, there is a much faster data rate, so we're looking at around 10.5 megabytes per second. And that assumes one time, so when it's just spinning at normal speed, it can do about 10.5 megabytes per second. And on top of that, you've got a storage which is around 9 gigabytes. That assumes, because on these DVDs that you have, you can use one side of it, which is about 4.5 gigabytes, and you can also use two layers of that, so you can have a second layer underneath, which will then get you about 9 gigabytes on one side of the disk. You can actually use a second side of the disk and have about 18 gigabytes, but most disks are probably using about 9. In terms of portability, exactly the same as a CD, so it is fairly portable. You can write things onto it, take it to a friend, use it on their computer. In terms of the durability, again, it's exactly the same, so it's fairly durable with a case. And it's fairly reliable as long as you don't drop it or scratch it and you're careful with it. In terms of what it's used for, obviously it's used for playing videos, and don't confuse it, it's not a digital video disc, it's a digital versatile disc because it can play video, it can also store other data. Also used for software, so games for consoles, other software, and that's really its main uses. It can also be used for making backups as well. Obviously, you could look at the new Blu-ray device, which is just an extension, same size as a CD or a DVD, but it uses a thinner wavelength on the light. It uses a blue light, which means it can store even more data on top of that. In terms of solid-state drives, or solid-state media, Common ones which we would think about, possibly SD cards, SD high capacity, and then your standard USB sticks, which we've got some pictures of down here. So if we look at SD, which stands for Secure Digital, there's actually three. There's the SD high capacity, and the SD extended capacity. In terms of the capacities of these, you've got about 1 megabyte to 2 gigabytes for the standard SD card. Then you go from 2 gigabytes right up to about 32 gigabytes, and then for the newer extended capacities you go from 32 gigabytes all the way up to 2 terabytes, so absolutely massive in terms of what they can store. In terms of the speeds which you can get out of them, they are relatively fast compared to CDs and even DVDs, and so you're looking at probably getting about 1 megabyte per second up to around 15 megabytes per second, and they are still getting faster. In terms of portability, incredibly portable. So pop it into your pocket, off you go. Durability, again, very durable, both memory sticks and SD cards. So you can drop them and it's fairly likely that they will survive that. In terms of reliability, they are fairly reliable. There's no moving parts inside, so in terms of their portability, when you're moving them around, they're much more reliable than a hard disk drive. And the usage, therefore, has become very, very popular as they've got cheap enough to buy them for ordinary uses. And so digital cameras, they can be used for smartphones, mainly because their size and there's no moving parts, because they're very portable, tablet computers, and even some video cameras now because they have the storage space. Moving on, we have magnetic tapes. And there's also DV digital video, which is what we have an example of at the bottom. And also DV there. So in terms of capacity, these can be incredibly large in the amount of data which they can store. So one of these tapes, which can be used for backups, the latest figures which I've been looking at, you can be looking at around 5 terabytes of data on one tape. In terms of the speed which you can get out of them, somewhere up to around 250 megabytes per second. So incredibly fast at storing things. Portable, they are relatively portable. It's a shame that not too many people have the same drives, but they are portable. So if you do a backup of the data on your hard disk onto one of these, you can take that and take it away to a remote location. Again, because they're mainly used for backups, they're durable, the tapes, and obviously they're going to be reliable because you don't want to lose the data on your backup. In terms of usage, the major usage of these is backups and also archives. So backups in case a hard disk fails, you then have a backup which you can restore, and archives, maybe the data won't be needed or it's very unlikely it will be needed, but if for some reason you have to go back, you can look in the archive and see what the data was. DV is storing much less data, and it's just a magnetic tape drive which is made for digital video. And here, very similar in reliability and durability, and the major usage is for video cameras. The next one, very, very common device, is your hard disk drive. And what we see here is, and this is just another magnetic media, what we see is the media itself is inbuilt to the drive, so you don't get to change this, and that's because of the sensitivity of it. If you were to open it up like this one's been opened up, then you would destroy the disk, it wouldn't work anymore. And this device, which is a hard disk drive, the media is inbuilt with it. In terms of capacity, it's going up all the time, but it's reasonable to say something like 500 gigabytes up to 2 terabytes is a reasonable size for the capacity. In terms of the speed, which you'd be looking at, probably something like 500 megabytes per second would seem reasonable. In terms of portability, they are now put with caddies and USB to plug them in, so we'll say that they're somewhat portable. They aren't great for portability because as you move them, you move the heads, and if the head crashes on top of the disk, then that can break some sectors or break the drive itself. So they're not built for portability like other media which we use, however they can be used in that way. They are relatively durable. However, because there's moving parts, this motor is possible to fail. As soon as it fails, it won't spin anymore, and so that fails the hard disk. And it's possible that this actuator here, which moves the head between the locations on the disk, that can fail as well. And the drive head as well here, it's possible that it smashes into the hard disk itself. So, relatively durable. And the same with reliability, so it is possible that hard disk can suddenly fail on you and you can't read your data off, or you need to pay a lot to get the data recovered. In terms of usage, they are the main secondary storage for the computer, so they will store your programs, they will store your data, and that's the main drive which you're going to be using to get the computer working. Also, they typically will be storing your operating system as well. And things are changing and moving over to solid state, especially with newer computers and new laptops and tablets and things. So hard drives are slowly being replaced. And finally, we're going to look at a rather old and I guess now obsolete technology, which is the humble floppy disk. And the media into a floppy disk drive is obviously a floppy disk. And these are called floppy because although they've got an external case around them which is fairly hard and fairly hard plastic, if you open up this case and have a look inside, what you end up with is this very floppy disk, and you can wave it about and it flops about. In terms of capacity, they were tiny by comparison to what we have today. The most common format which was used through the late 80s and 90s was the 1.44 megabyte capacity floppy disk, which was at the time it was made rather large, but when it became obsolete it was absolutely tiny, obviously. In terms of the speed which you could get out of it, somewhere around 10 kilobytes per second. Maximum speed in theory was 100 kilobytes per second. So by today's standards, incredibly slow. Portability, they were relatively portable. You could use them for sharing documents. In terms of the durability of these disks, they were relatively durable because of the hard case which they had, and also because this protector, normally metal, sometimes plastic, would slide on and off to read the disk. So the disk was encased in this, and so they were fairly durable and relatively reliable. In terms of usage, sharing documents, and many years ago they were also used for backups. Today though, of course, we don't really see these things, and so it's just really more a bit of a history lesson these days, so probably best not to really think about these.